yourself, king. Be yourself. Be yourself, queen. Be yourself. Be yourself, king. Be yourself. Be yourself, queen. Be yourself.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your man, Dr. Corbin Smith, and this is the YMCME podcast. As you know, our co-host, Santi Dean, she's not here with us today. She is hard at work prepping for our youth symposium that we have coming Saturday, October the 12th. It's going to be a great event. If you can make it, I suggest you do. It's going to be some great people discussing the power and importance of youth mentoring. Please make sure you make your way to our website to get your tickets for that event. Also, I would like to share that this month's theme for our podcast is centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all of the podcasts you're going to hear for the month of October will be centered and focused on DEI. Now, for this podcast, it's kind of a spinoff to the Just Fellowship podcast we had a few weeks ago, talking about our delegation to Cuba. And this young lady actually attended with us. And I mean, she's powerful woman. She speaks with passion and conviction, and you know, she is amazing. She got there, she felt at home with the people, and you could tell by her behavior. And I also found out that she can sing and play the guitar as well. And I'm telling you, somebody needs to sign her. You know, YMC Records, I don't know. We were talking about it during the trip. So without further ado, I have to introduce this lady. Her name is Alexandra Valladares, and she is a DPS parent, a former school board member of Durham Public Schools, graduate of North Carolina Central University. And if it has anything to do with empowering communities of color in Durham, she's there and she's a part. So without further ado, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview. Can you tell me about your background and work related to education and systematic oppression?
Yeah, my background is that I'm a graduate of Durham Public Schools. I'm a graduate of public schools in general, and that in my profession, I actually work for the Boost Science program at Duke University, and it's a science outreach program that works to provide opportunities for underserved communities, underserved students, underrepresented and underserved students. And besides that, I'm also an education advocate. And so I've done advocacy for many years. And most recently, I just finished my term on the school board for Durham Public Schools.
Okay, thank you. So just so I can get your understanding of systematic oppression, how would you define systematic oppression in the context of education?
I think systematic oppression is built into the design of schools as they are. The model is outdated. People say that quite a bit, but the model had a purpose to create working class, the industrial complex, within the context of people having property rights, people having avenues to certain people, certain families having means. And when I think about education, K through 12 education, most often, there's metrics that we're looking at from kindergarten, maybe qualitative data, but then third grade, there's the kinds of exams that just show whether students are at reading level. And I think that right there provides an opportunity to look at some of the complexity of oppression and marginalization happening with certain students, because the basis for reading is having access to early childhood opportunities, which some families don't have access to that. And some of the efforts have been towards increasing opportunities for families to participate in early childhood opportunities or early childhood programs. And one of the programs nationally is Head Start, which does try to provide opportunity to low-income families. But the reality is that not all early childhood programs offer transportation, and there are families that don't have access to. They may apply for a program, but if they don't have transportation to take their child to a site that may not even be close to their house because of the demand on early childhood programs, then that family is going to be left without options even to take advantage of that opportunity. And the educational system that we have is not comprehensive enough to include addressing social drivers or some of these factors like housing issues, transportation issues, language barriers, which are also a deterrent for many families as well, because many of the applications or even the process, the interview process, the screening process, I mean, it may seem that it's not being inclusive when it's not available in the many languages that our families speak, especially the complexity and the diversity of families that are immigrating to the United States with maybe limited English proficiency. Some families that may speak multiple languages, but those languages are not reflected in the systems that we use or in the information that we provide. And so it's important to take into account language access. And I was an ESL student, so I speak from experience that navigating the school system was really hard for me. Number one, because my parents didn't speak the language. Number two, because there were opportunities that were often not provided to me because it was assumed that it's not even worth giving me the opportunity. And on many occasions, I had to ask my classmates, like, what is that paper? Wait, what did the teacher give you? And it was up to my classmates to share the information and tell me, well, this is a program. It's for a magnet school, and you have to apply. And then I would go to the teacher and say, can I have one? Can I get a paper as well? And it was, that need to be an advocate from childhood and having to look out for my, for my own education, because many times I was not offered opportunities. That created a way for me to take advantage of magnet programs. But that shouldn't be on a child. And there shouldn't be families that certain educators feel are not worth engaging or not worth even talking to, or children who, shouldn't get opportunities. And so I think that there's a need to address marginalization holistically as a society, poverty, housing, food insecurity, and, transportation and everything else that may be impacting family. And that needs to start from early childhood. That needs to start even before kindergarten. We need to do a better job as a society to make sure that we're figuring out what the context is and that there are social supports. I feel like the other piece of this is that while there are human social services, those systems also, there's some complexity with that too. And the ways that families sometimes navigate that system to get support. And there's some stories about like feeling dignified or undignified, and families that also opt not to engage certain systems because they don't feel that those systems are really looking out for them. And so the school system particularly needs to do needs to have enough social workers, and currently many school districts are lacking social workers. They're lacking psychologists. They're lacking everything. I mean, therapy is outsourced, right? It's a private market, and so schools have to contract with different mental health providers and all that. But I think that my take on oppression and marginalization is the fact that we choose not to meet kids and meet students, meet families, meet communities where they're at. And that exacerbates it. And the system was built not taking into account the different points of access or the different historical, it doesn't take into account the history of what some families have had to navigate because of who they are, because of their identity, demographics, everything.
Okay. Thank you for that. And you kind of led into my next question. You identified a lot of barriers. But I want to ask you, out of all of those barriers, right, what barrier or barriers are the most significant within the current educational system when it comes to marginalized students?
I think the biggest barrier is resources. I continue to criticize and speak out against the budget caps that the state puts on local education agencies when it relates to funding or using resources to support English language learners, ELL students, that are ESL students, English as a second language, limited English proficiency students, and also students with disabilities. Those are the two groups that the state has listed a cap. And for ESL, the cap is 10.6%. And it's been 10% for many years. And it's not commensurate with the number of students that we have that receive services from the ESL department or departments that serve English limited proficient students, ELL students. English language learners is actually the term for ELL. And the other cap is for students with disabilities. That cap did move slightly, very slightly. There was a lot of advocacy. It was 12.75%. And right now it's 12.99, 13%. But that's also not commensurate with the number of students that we have in the school district that have disabilities. I mean, there's a need to address the most vulnerable students. We see the dynamics when there's not a lot of support for students, especially students with disabilities. In Durham Public Schools, students with disabilities are the second largest group of students being suspended after Black boys. And so we continue to see the trend of Black boys being suspended far more than any other group. And then you have students with disabilities also being the second largest group, dealing with suspensions, kids that are out of classroom, that impacts their ability to stay on top of the coursework, their motivation. And so we have to address the racism, because it is definitely very clear that, and nationally the research also shows that Black boys have been targeted many times, not given opportunities. And when you are a Black boy with disabilities, I mean, it's like that just adds on even more, right? Because the second largest group is the students with disabilities. And you have also within students with disabilities, immigrant students, so many different groups. And I think that we need to address perceptions and stereotypes that certain students are not worth mentoring, are not worth supporting, and that they should just be relegated to discipline practices that don't really help, and actually put kids further behind And so the school to prison pipeline is definitely one of the biggest, sorest um, uh, tactics, I think, or mechanisms by which oppression continues, especially for marginalized students. And we have to address the implicit bias that educators have when they decide to send a child out of their classroom away to detention or suspension or any of these things because of disrespectful behavior, which is very biased, right? And disrespectful behavior, Black boys and students with disabilities, Black male students and students with disabilities are first and second largest group. And then after that, you do have, we do see a need to continue to address discipline disparities as it relates to students of color, but primarily Black boys.
Okay, thank you for that. Very detailed. I appreciate it, and I know our listeners will appreciate it as well. Now, you spoke on traditional systems, and I know before we had this conversation, we had a few conversations where we gave it a name, right? These conventional boxes, right? Where you're supposed, and it's ironic, you say school to prison pipeline, right? And it's a box, right? That you go to when you're in prison. So I want to touch base because you're leading quite well with the questions, real life impacts that, these systems, this data has on young people. So my next question to you is, how does the current education system discourage students who do not fit into the conventional boxes that have been created by the system, by capitalistic society?
I have so many examples of discouragement. I actually have too many stories. Stories that stay with me because the impact of what has happened, the impact continues to affect families very deeply. I currently work with a group of mothers, parents, siblings, community leaders connected to students that have died from gun violence. And first of all, knowing some of the children and knowing some of the families, interacting with them, there are many stories of ways that the school system, before these students were ever in a trajectory, ever in sorry, this is kind of hard for me. We fast tracked. I'm going to give you one example. We fast tracked to a student, one of two students whose bodies were found behind Brogdon Middle School. This family gave me permission to speak about this because they still feel that there's a need to talk about the harms that happen with suspension. This student, as well as the other students, were sent to Lakeview, which is the alternative school. It's a school where when you are suspended long-term, instead of being suspended and being home and not being in school, then, Lakeview is the school that you go to. And it's the alternative school. So it helps students fulfill the terms of their long-term suspension, especially if they've been suspended for the rest of the year. And I have walked with students who have talked about how life-changing going to Lakeview has been, and not in the good way. When you get suspended for small little things, maybe you were skipping, maybe you decided to do Fight Club, which is actually one of the cases of one of the students, not this particular student, but in one case it was a student who'd been in his school for 3 months, and he tried to get into the sports team, into the soccer team, and he was denied that opportunity. He did everything he could, and he couldn't participate in any sports, so he decided to create his own sport. So he did Fight Club. And this is actually, there's an article that was written by a student in the Durham Voices, and I thank the Durham Voices group of journalists for featuring the story of this particular student that I'm connected to, and I know his story, and I remember going to the appeals process for his suspension because he was called a gang member so many times. And I'm trying to see if I can find the title of this article, but this is, the student spoke to, this article is from May 22nd, 2024. It's Community Voices Concerns about Durham Schools Discipline Disparities. And so since this article right here, he talks about, this is Sahir Rivera, who actually survived gun violence. 4 bullets, he survived, you know, such a life-changing thing. And he speaks out about how schools have this mechanism by which they do relegate some students to the school to prison pipeline, by already asserting things that are stereotypes, asserting things that are harmful and toxic. This student sat in appeals. His mom was trying to appeal the school and saying, don't suspend my son long term for taking initiative and creating his own sport, you know. This article here says Rivera was introduced to a fight club where he and his friends would go to the school's bathroom and roughhouse. People would bust a lip or get a bloody nose, but it wasn't too violent. Videos of their fights began to spread on social media, and eventually the school found out. He said the school was run like a tight ship where the administration wanted only the best, in quotations. And I'm going to stay on only the best. Only the best is not only the best for Sahir Rivera and the students. Only the best means only the best students in that school, because many students were pushed out, and the mechanism by which they're pushed out is through suspension, long-term suspension. When Sahir was suspended long-term, he tried to come back to the school, and this is Durham School of the Arts, and he was not allowed to come back. So he had to go to ISS. He had to go to long-term suspension at Lakeview. And the reality is that when you have a concentration of kids who have been all suspended, there's only $13,000 that are given to Lakeview. The school does not have enough resources. There is not a lot of hands-on, innovative opportunities at Lakeview. The students talk about the metal detectors, and they pretty much say it's Durham Public Schools' version of a jail. But I also have to give credit to the administration for trying to change and use their resources, their very limited resources, in the best ways that they can. I know that the principal of the school at Lakeview, you know, has done partnerships, has tried to bring, you know, community groups to come in and offer services, because $13,000 a year does not fund what is necessary for these students. And so in the case of the students at Brogden, they did not live to tell their side of the story, but I do know that they were also suspended. In the case of Honduran family student, Angel Canales, and also Osmar Vanegas. Osmar used to be a wrestling champ, and he was all into wrestling, and it helped him stay motivated in school. And his mom cries and tells me the principal decided to suspend him and punish him because, you know, I don't know, maybe he was talking something menial, and he was just kicked off the wrestling team. And that just spurred, you know, having to find other ways to channel, sometimes students channel frustration with sports. And when it comes to Durham Public Schools, for a lot of students who play sports beyond just football, some students play soccer, and they talk about limited opportunities for soccer. It's dominated by white students for the most part. They talk about race and class and discrimination, and sometimes in access to sports in some schools. But I know that there are some schools that have been really intentional, especially like Hillside High School has done the best work to try to like create opportunities for soccer for students that are students of color, I think that we have to explore mechanisms by which we engage students. In this case, Osmar was into wrestling, and he said, that it really affected him. He told his mom, like, that was something that just, took out his motivation, when he was no longer allowed to participate in wrestling. There was no follow-up. There was no mentoring. And then he was just hanging out with friends on the unfortunate night when he was shot behind the school at Brogden. And so we have to continue to reckon with students that we have not provided opportunities, students that we have deemed that they cannot participate in sports. And there's a lot of requirements to participate in sports in North Carolina. And that's actually predicated even beyond local education agencies, because the association at the state level also put some guidelines as to, like, you have to have your checkups, you have to have your form filled out, you have to have all of these different things. And some families also talk about, access to taking your kids for just a checkup, to fill out the form. In some places, they don't have forms to provide to families. And so the families have to be really extra proactive to get those forms from the coach. And so there's so many different ways by which there's direct impact. Some students are no longer with us, and it's more than the digits that I have right now in my hand. It pains me that Osmar Vanegas is not here, Angel Canales is not here. It pains me that Miguelito Cruz is not here. It pains me that we have other students as well that are no longer here. And the other case is Sahir Rivera, who lives to tell the story. And he's talking about some of the inequities. And he actually worked with Dr. Stacey Stewart, who was the chief of schools, towards training and talking to principals about, thinking twice before throwing students away. And the school systems, they have mechanisms by which they essentially symbolically, but very emotionally and directly throw students away. Sometimes telling them that they don't belong in schools, that they want only the best. They want only the best students in their school. And that is not something that is not a message that any student should receive, that they are not school material, because public law says that every child has a right to a free and appropriate public education. That is their due right, every student. And so we have to figure out the ways by which we utilize mentorship opportunities and partnerships, by which we utilize community organizations that can follow up and support families, that we continue to advocate so that social services, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other systems do provide the necessary supports for families. And I think that it is something that, as a society, we need to make sure that that we address the needs of students holistically.
Okay. Thank you for that. So there's a segment we have here on YMC and Me, the podcast, that we call Reveal Your Heal. And this segment is really focused around the impact on mental health with any topic that we have, with any guest that we have. So since we have you here today, I would like to ask you, what are the long-term effects of educational trauma on marginalized youth, and how can these be mitigated?
Trauma creates many different health disparities. Anxiety. There are a lot of people who talk about the comorbidities, right, that come with depression, anxiety. Students who are diagnosed with ADHD and autism sometimes also experience the trauma of not being understood or not having the diagnoses in time, and just the severity of not being treated right. But when it comes to trauma, like, there can be exacerbation for comorbidities, and I think that mental health is is comprehensive. Health is having support, having people you can talk to, having a therapist, there's so many families that I talk to who, their children could use therapy, but they don't have access to therapy. Therapy is not provided in the school system unless you have a counselor that is dedicated to talking to a student. But when it comes to therapy, when it comes to the mental health model, we have privatized that. That is a really sad reality right now. I understand that on the business side, it works for people to be, to work in private agencies and provide services. But when it comes to students who need these services, who may not have insurance, that leaves them out. And some students, we talk about Medicaid, but not all students qualify for Medicaid, even if they are under-resourced in terms of finances, even if their household is in poverty, they may not qualify because of the requirements of, I'm thinking about documentation status. There's so many different things where some students are documented, some students are not. And so making mental health privatized, I think, as a society, we need to rethink that. We should have therapists in schools. We need therapists in the schools. We have social workers in the schools, and I know that some schools hire, but we don't have enough for all the students. We don't meet the demand. The ratio is supposed to be 1 to 250 students. Right now, the ratio, there's some schools that are almost getting to 1,000. The ratio is 1 to 1,000. We need to work on that. A school that has 900 students should have at least, should have close to 4 therapists, right? And that's not counselors, you name it, social workers. There's so many people, but mental health, I think, there's studies that talk about like how it impacts your longevity, your life expectancy. Trauma can impact your ability to do anything safely. And I can say that firsthand, as somebody who has experienced trauma and has had my own healing journey around that, there are many things that affect your ability to live a full life and to be to have the conditions that allow you to thrive. And so we need to address those barriers. We need to make sure that students that are experiencing trauma, that they receive follow-up, that they receive support. There's a lot of work right now happening in Durham around adverse childhood experiences. And we know that Dr. Wanda Boone is one of the folks who has been working on that. The Duke Division of Community Health, I remember I was volunteering with Maria Padilla and Fred Johnson, Dr. Wanda Boone. There were other folks towards raising awareness about ACEs and trauma, like adverse childhood experiences. That was just the awareness. And then, of course, the importance of organizations like Durham Tri, organizations that provide support to students like EPIC, like ISLA, so many other organizations that are working to support families and students and to address the barriers and to get at trauma, but not only trauma. I think that more support needs to be provided specifically towards trauma.
Okay, thank you for that. I have 3 more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is around policy and systematic change. So with all of the disparities and inequalities and all of the experiences and things that we are seeing happening in the community, my next question is, what policy changes are necessary to create a more equitable education system?
Yeah, I would say policy changes at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, federal level. The first thing, I think everything is predicated on not just having sound policy, but having the resources to implement it. There are so many changes. Like I know, like the local school district, we changed our policy and regarding dress code. It was important to, put policies forth that won't put students in the predicament of being suspended because of something that is minor, that is a dress code violation. And we looked over that. We also worked on policies around suspensions. That has been work that has been ongoing. Even before I was on the board, there was a discipline matrix, and our former mayor, Elaine O'Neill, participated in that. I was a part of the whole child equity committee, and we were looking at ways that we can support the whole child. But you can have policies that are based on public health, like whole child approach, super important. Policies that talk about support for students, social emotional learning, about, increasing access and saying that, every school should have social emotional learning frameworks. I mean, Durham Public Schools leads with that. I mean, has done that work to include social emotional learning frameworks. You can have a restraint and seclusion policy that helps, students not go through restraint and seclusion, mitigate against violence against our students. We have a lot of work to do, right? And in Durham Public Schools, I think that is definitely something that there's a desire, at least since the last conversations that I had, to bring back a committee and look at some of these things. Whether that committee is going to look a little different than the previous ones, maybe. The scope is going to be important to kind of look at. But nationally, I think we have some needs. We need funding, federal funding, for mentorship opportunities. And statewide, I know that there's a lot of work that is happening, and I shout out the work of Youth Mentorship Collaborative, who are advocating at the state level for those opportunities. But I think, there has to be something in terms of the federal government understanding that, some students need, I'm not going to say the students need it just because they need it. Some students have been done so wrong in society, not having trusted adults that they can trust, not having support in their studies, needing those layers of support. And so we need to make trauma and adverse childhood experiences, that needs to be written into policy. There currently isn't any policy except for a policy like McKinney-Vento, which addresses the needs of our students who are experiencing homelessness. And that is a federal policy. McKinney-Vento is a federal program that serves students who are experiencing homelessness. But we don't have a federal policy that talks about how do we deal with trauma and how do we deal with adverse childhood experiences? How do we deal with, the need for mentorship, the need for support? Like, it's not written in policy. I mean, nationally, there's so many mentoring programs. There's so many student-oriented programs that are doing great work. I work for one, Boost Science program, that provides opportunities for students to engage in science and love science. But I think nationally, federally, there has to be more understanding and more policies about serving students that experience homelessness, which is also a factor. It impacts students greatly. Housing impacts students greatly. But we need to address other forms of oppression and other forms of disenfranchisement and other forms of low resources as well. At the state level, I skipped the state level, but at the state level, there has to be, I think, a policy, because right now we are owed money from the Leandro plan. Millions of dollars. Durham could get $70 million that we have not gotten. And there's been a lot of advocacy because this is already at the court level, the Supreme Court. It's just been a case that has met pushback, but yet has advanced. And so the Leandro plan is legit. Schools need to be funded. And yet the state sits on a lot of money and has not given us that money. And so when it comes to budget appropriations, when it comes to how our state does our budget, when there's a ruling that that money is owed to the schools, that money needs to come to the schools. Point blank. And that's not happening. And so how do we compel our state leaders? How do we continue to compel them? Because they've already heard it. They hear it. There's been a lot of advocacy about Leandro. I don't think any education advocate has not engaged in some form of talking about Leandro. And so we need the state to make sure that they do right. And when it comes to their budget, pay what they owe to the children of North Carolina. And budgets and everything, they fall within the governance, within policy, within all that. It's all connected. So, yeah.
Okay. Two more questions. This one is about future outlook. So, what advice would you give young people facing these systematic barriers and feeling discouraged about their educational and career prospects?
Never give up is definitely the first thing that comes to mind. But the other thing is, I believe firmly in connection. I believe that connection is our way to thrive. And so to stay connected with peers, with educators, family leaders, if they're in the faith, they go to church or a faith institution, synagogue, wherever they go, it's important to stay connected. And I think, that goes with No Man is an Island, right, by John Donne, which I remember reading when I was in school. And the notion of that No Man is an Island is that, I guess it's a kind of invitation, like, don't do it by yourself, and so I think that just goes back to stay connected. But the other thing is keep your ears open, your eyes open, because sometimes opportunities are right there. And it happened to me many times where I had to kind of see what's happening around me and say, hey, I didn't get that paper. That might be a paper that I could use, could be something good. And many times it was definitely something that I should have gotten. So I want students to stay connected and also keep their ears and eyes open to opportunities. And if they ever need some help, maybe the teacher won't give them the paper, or, maybe those things can happen. That they have adults that they trust that can advocate for them and say, hey, I'm here to have a meeting with you to talk about my student, my niece, my neighbor's daughter who, mom gave permission. And although you may not be able to share with me because I'm not a family member, I just want you to know that I believe resources should be accessible to all students, something like that. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that all forms of advocacy are efficient, but I think that the trying kind of gives a message to it kind of sends a message, that people are watching, people are looking. And one of the best forms that I can say is it's the grandparents too. I think one of the best forms when the grandparents show up, they show up to the schools. And grandparents are like, I need to hear from somebody. And they're like, well, you need to follow this process. They're like, I need to talk to somebody. And I think that sometimes those messages in terms of somebody's watching, somebody's paying attention. So we need to do right by every single student. So I just want to tell the students to make sure that they identify, and if they don't identify any adults that they trust or believe have their back, I think that we need SOSs. We need students to give us SOSs. There should be a database nationally where if there's a student who, and this should be managed, this should be something that the federal government takes care of, when it comes to students who, we talk about the helplines for suicide prevention, but when it comes to students who are really drowning, who are like, I have absolutely nobody. And, I think the omen is on the school as well. Like those adults that are interacting with that student, how many of those adults are actually taking time? But I think that if there are a couple of, entries from a certain school district, that might help change that process in terms of like, how, the principal supervisors, right? The assistant superintendents, are making sure that the principals are making sure their kids are okay, and that they can at least identify one adult in the building they can trust. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm just saying that there are so many SOSs that go unheard, and cries for help, right? Like so many cries for help that go unheard, and we need to make sure that students have people to look out for them, that students know their rights, that nobody can tell them that they don't belong in a school, and that students also continue to grow their network, because that's also part of like their career development, to grow their network. And part of that network is the mentors and mentorship program. So I believe that we need to support mentorship programs. They're life-changing.
Okay. One last question for closing thoughts. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and get involved in supporting educational equality?
So I'm really honored to be a part of the Boost Science program. Our focus is science. So we have a Facebook page. We have pretty much all the social media, Instagram, you name it, and a website. But when it comes to like my advocacy, my name is Alexandra Valladares, and I like to keep my email public. I put it out there that's my email, so folks can reach out if they have any questions about parent advocacy, which I've done, working with students, survivors of gun violence, or student families who have lost their child to gun violence. This has been important work for me, and I'm grateful to have the support of Dr. Rosa Guarda from School of Nursing, who has also seen the opportunity to support these families as well. And so reach out to Boost, reach out to I guess my email is public, but if you want to know the email, it's Comunidad de Durham. It's Durham Community in Spanish. So Comunidad de Durham @gmail.com. 1 M. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I told her the story. I have one more question. It's a bonus question. I always like to ask people this. It kind of lightens the mood.
Okay. How
many jelly beans can you fit in a suitcase?
Well, I'm thinking millions, so I'm gonna tell you a number. I like 2.5.
2.5 million? Okay.
It's not an answer you haven't.
No, I just always ask you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and take care.
Thank you.
If you would like to be on the YMCME podcast to give your perspective on youth mentoring, whether you're a subject matter expert, a mentor, or mentee, contact us at info@youthmentoringcollaborative.org.
Be yourself, king. Be yourself. Be yourself, queen. Be yourself. Be yourself, king. Be yourself. Be yourself, queen.